All right, I just want to welcome everybody. This is the kickoff meeting for the National Shoreline Management Study, the South Atlantic region. And thank you everyone for joining. My name is Jenna Scott, representing the CDM Smith team when we're helping to facilitate today's meeting and helping to draft the report. A few WebEx logistics. The meeting is being recorded. To reduce any background noise, please mute yourselves. And when we're having discussions, definitely unmute yourself. If you'd like to speak, there's a little hand raise icon. If you hover over your name, it should pop up. And then also, please use the chat box as ideas come up, questions. If you want to introduce yourself through there, definitely utilize that. And then for those of you able to only on call-in only, if you have access to the webinar link, be best. And for our round of introductions in a few minutes, I'm going to ask everyone to turn on their videos briefly. But for now, I'd like to introduce Lisa Clark. She's the regional point of contact for the Army Corps Jacksonville District. Lisa, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Jenna. I appreciate that. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to everyone who has joined us today. I'm Lisa Clark, as Jenna said, and I'm the outreach lead for the South Atlantic Coastal Study, as well as the regional point of contact for the National Shoreline Management Study. Also with us today from the South Atlantic Coastal Study team are Matt Schrader, who is our lead planner, and Dr. Clay McCoy, our regional sediment management lead. Some, if not many of you, have likely participated in our vision meetings, field workshops, and last year's focus area webinar series. We appreciate the time you have devoted to the SACs, and now as a key stakeholder for the National Shoreline Management Study. The SACs evaluates coastal risk along approximately 65,000 miles of tidally influenced shoreline in this region. The South Atlantic Regional Assessment for the NSMS focuses on sandy beaches from North Carolina to Southwest Florida. SACS looks at coastal risk, but is limited on how it accounts for erosion and accretion. NSMS goes into more depth on erosion and accretion and their impacts. You'll learn more about this as the team goes through the presentation today. Again, we thank you and appreciate you being here for this kickoff webinar. And now back over to Jenna Scott. Jenna?
All right, thank you, Lisa. Why don't we have everybody turn on your cameras real quick, and as I go through the different groups, everyone give a wave or a thumbs up or a virtual high five, whatever you'd like. Who here is from the other Army Corps districts? Savannah, Charleston, William. Oh my gosh. North Carolina. Just give a quick wave. Who do we have here from other federal groups? EPA or BOEM or FEMA? All right, welcome. Do we have any of our tribal partners represented today? Welcome to those folks. How about regional representatives covering more than one state or more than one county? All righty, welcome. We also have North Carolina representatives representing the state, or also county or towns. We have a lot of individual towns as well. Welcome. How about South Carolina? Georgia? Hello, hello. And who here is for Florida? Me. All right, welcome. And we also have a few representatives from the CDM Smith team who will be helping facilitate this. Welcome to everybody. And is there anybody else? Don't want to miss anybody. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Well, I'm going to stop my video for now, and we'll go to continue the presentation. So a few of the objectives for today's meeting is intended to introduce the South Atlantic Regional Assessment that is going to become part of the National Shoreline Management Study. This is a study led by the Institute for Water Resources, a part of the Army Corps of Engineers. We seek your input to help fill in the gaps on identifying locations of shoreline change, what is causing the change, and what needs to be done to address the changes. And we also are seeking your input on ongoing shoreline management, what is working, what could be done differently, where you need assistance, and what you would like to see out of this report. A brief overview of the agenda. We are going to go through real quickly the process, where we're at currently, and then we want to get into discussion, and it's going to be a two-way conversation. We encourage everyone to be involved and speak up. There's going to be a few live polls too that we'll go over once we get to them. And then we'll wrap it up and we'll go over the next steps. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Mariah Abelera, who is the primary point of contact for the USAC Institute for Water Resources, and she'll give an overview of the National Shoreline Management Study. Mariah?
Everyone. Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for joining today. So I just wanted to highlight a little bit of background on why we're doing this study. And right now we're focused on the South Atlantic, but to give you a more comprehensive view of the National Shoreline Management Study, it was authorized by Congress under WRDA 99, and it's looking at shoreline changes and impacts resulting from sediment movement, particularly focused around erosion and accretion, and then impacts associated with the economic and environmental impacts around the sediment movement. And so if you could move over to the next slide. And so the way we've approached this is, in order to understand on a national scale what's happening with sediment movement, we broke the country into 8 regions, and we're developing 8 regional assessments. So the assessments will essentially be rolled up into that national scale report, and that's going to present our findings. And that national report will be highlighting the challenges across all of the regions. So we'll highlight the unique challenges within each of the regions based on our regional assessments. And then we will also be highlighting the things that we're seeing across the nation. And that will be incorporated into that national overview report. And one of the things that we're looking to do that we hadn't done in our previous reports is incorporating a set of recommendations to help inform the needs and opportunities. And these will be, again, incorporated in our regional assessments and then rolled up into our national overview report. And, we appreciate your input in helping us to craft our messaging for our report, because this is a response to Congress. The report will ultimately be delivered to Congress to answer our study authority. And so, again, we look at you all as the regional experts in the area to help inform our report and make sure that we're capturing the needs, the opportunities, and what's really happening on the ground in each of our regions. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to our regional team.
Thank you, Mariah. So a brief overview of the process. We're looking to quantitatively and qualitatively document the impacts of erosion and accretion As Lisa had said, the focus of this is sandy shorelines. The study area starts in North Carolina and covers North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and the east coast of Florida, and then wraps around up to the Monroe-Collier County border, just south of Naples. It also includes the Keys. This report will be used to identify needs and opportunities, and it will enhance the shoreline resiliency and improve shoreline management. This is going to be based on a synthesis of existing information. There won't be any new research conducted. So a quick overview of the outline for the report. It'll look at the existing, documenting the existing conditions, where future conditions, when you consider sea level rise, will impact the area, where that will increase. A summary of the shoreline existing management approaches, the economic and social impacts, the environmental impacts, and then an integrated approach to shoreline management, as well as our findings and recommendations. Does anyone have any questions at this time? All right. So part of the project process is where we are right now. We're engaging with our regional stakeholders and partners. Through these webinars and follow-up conversations, we'd like to identify our regional key issues that are concerning the effects of erosion and accretion and those impacts. We'd also like to identify case studies that highlight the key issues and begin to draft our recommendations. Through the report, we're going to document the shoreline erosion and accretion, management approaches, and economic and environmental impacts. The report is going to come out at a 50% draft and an 80% draft, which will be sent out to everybody for a chance to review and provide additional input on. And then at the end, we will review the developed proposed recommendations as well. So this was the pre-meeting poll that was sent out last week, and I thank everyone for their participation. We were asking for the most significant impacts of shoreline and accretion now and in the future in your state or region. And it looks pretty evenly split between structures and infrastructure, flooding and storms, and beaches, dunes, and bluffs as being the most impacted by erosion. But we also have human well-being, which means, our ability to enjoy the shore, wildlife and habitat, also their ability to thrive at the shore, project maintenance, if those costs are going up because of erosion, and also ship traffic and navigation features and cultural resources and tribal lands that are impacted by erosion. Was there any surprises here or differences on impacts from now versus the future? All right. So that gets us to our first discussion point. We want to document the existing conditions. We're going to heavily leverage what we've learned through the SAC study, through our stakeholder outreach and the products that were developed. We're starting with the SAND report, our workshops and webinars that were held in 2019 and 2020. And the SACs identified areas at risk from erosion. And those were developed using multiple sources. We have the FDEP critically eroded shorelines, North Carolina's interactive shoreline map, the South Carolina Berm Explorer shoreline map, various beach and management plans, and other USGS reports. So I guess we're looking for a good erosion data for the state of Georgia. And if there's any studies about erosion that's of sandy beaches that's been caused by shipwake and navigation channels or smaller craft. So I'll pause there. Does anybody want to add anything? Angela, does that about cover what we're looking for?
It does. I was going to say, if people have some studies that they think of, you can either share it in the chat box or you can email the email address related to the study.
Yeah, why don't we put that email address into the chat box? One other area that we were looking to gather some more information on is erosion that's causing problems for wildlife habitat. You know, if it's impacting piping plover nesting or sea turtle nesting, looking for that specifically, where erosion's caused habitat issues and impacts. Okay. All right, so we'll go on to our live poll. And I'm going to pass the presentation over to Tyler, who will launch the poll. And we're going to have everybody take out your phone or open up a second browser window. And you're going to the link on the screen here, this www.menti.com. So I'll give everyone a minute to do that. And when you go to that website, it's going to ask you for a code. And that's where you're going to enter the 34388073. All right, Tyler, why don't you take the screen over and we can show the results live as they come in on the poll.
I think I'm sharing. Can you confirm if you can see it?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
Just a quick note too for those if you're trying to get logged into the Menti website, there's also it's shown at the top of the slides in case you missed it on the previous slide.
Yes, thanks, Mariah.
Hey, Jenna, I see that someone has their hand raised. Doug? Did you want to
Hey,
say?
good afternoon or good morning. This is Doug Piekowski with BOEM. Can you hear me?
Yep. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, I just want you asked a question earlier about, or you made the point about soliciting information regarding the impacts to the environment from erosion. And I would just, I guess, offer the suggestion that whether it be today or future meetings, that you kind of better articulate what you actually are asking for from the stakeholders in terms of how they share that information. I think, you know, there's a bunch of different ways that can be communicated, both direct effects and indirect. And so, for example, on the indirect, just one example would be, you know, I don't know if stakeholders that manage federal or state lands that are on the coast are on this call, but, you know, perhaps there's an indirect component of sediment management and how it's impacting their ability to manage those assets.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also kind of just the basic direct effect of loss of habitat. And so I would just suggest that, since that is a big component of this study, helping the audience in how they should articulate that impact.
Yeah, no, great point. Yeah, we'd be looking for direct impacts, like you said, loss of habitat, and also the indirect impacts. You know, if it's infilling, if it's definitely. Thank you. Thank you
Hey,
for
Jenna,
that.
this is Matt Schrader. Can I?
Sorry.
Yep, go right ahead,
Question
Matt.
for, hey, Doug, this is Matt Schrader from the Core in Jacksonville District. So kind of piggybacking on what you're asking, particularly for the direct impacts through SACs and through other stuff, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about, for instance, impacts to habitat, turtle nesting habitat, just to pick out one, or piping plover habitat or something like that. When the Core, in particular, the Core and its partners do beach nourishment, generally it's to reduce damages to infrastructure or to structures. I'm kind of curious, particularly with the point that you brought out, if there are direct impacts to threatened endangered species habitat or something like that. Does anyone have any experience in this group with formulating beach nourishment projects or dune nourishment projects, particularly to address environmental impacts as opposed to mainly structural impacts? Does anybody have any experience with that, or does anybody see that as kind of a need that might be out there going into the future? Or Doug, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab, and I'd say you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's exactly what I'm getting at. I think like a recommendation from this report could maybe identify, you know, that gap, in that though the Corps has the authority to, you know, do ecosystem benefit analyses, there's this challenge in how to quantify that. And so, yeah, I think it would be helpful for the stakeholder group if, for example, there is means to articulate that in a way that you guys integrated into your planning approach. That would be super helpful. If it's a gap, it would be helpful to make note that though you have that authority, it's a challenge to integrate it into the current planning process.
Agreed. Yep.
Definitely good. Thank you, Doug. Roxanne, you have your hand raised.
No, sorry, I'm having trouble with unmuting. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So I was the same question, causing problems for habitat. Is this an is causing problems or a has caused problems? I mean, do we need to go into the whole business of, you know, why we have beaches for turtles and what kind of material you need for good turtle nesting, blah, blah, blah? Or is the question directed to existing or future problems?
I'd say it's primarily towards the future and existing problems. But Matt, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, specifically what I was talking about, and I was looking for Mike McGarry from Brevard County. He's not on here. If anybody else from Brevard could comment, but we've had some discussions in the past of one location in Brevard, particularly important for turtle nesting. And I'm not an expert in this subject, so just going by conversations I've had, particularly important for turtle nesting. And we've had discussions of, hey, well, why can't the Corps formulate a project for this area, et cetera? And kind of like what Doug was talking about, generally we come back to, well, how many structures are there, or what's the economic impact to the structures if something isn't done? And Mike keeps coming back to, well, no, the important thing is that this is important habitat. People are putting up seawalls that eventually we'll completely lose the habitat. And so, you know, something needs to be done more for the ecosystem restoration purpose. So that's an existing problem that could potentially get worse in the future based on, you know, based on what's going on now. So I don't know if that's answering your question, Roxanne, but in my mind, kind of getting some more examples like that, where, hey, beach nourishment done in an appropriate way, right, with the right sediment sources, et cetera, can be done specifically for environmental purposes rather than just for structural. Does that answer your question, Roxanne?
Well, kind of. I get your drift. And I would say that we have a number of state and national parks where there could be some ecosystem benefits from beach restoration. And some of those we've had to fund just out of the state coffers in the state parks.
Would it be
Agreed, yep.
would it be helpful to include a section on just using old statistics of turtle nesting prior to renourishment and turtle nesting numbers now across the Southeast?
Yep. Yeah, we can include, you know, the benefits of the beach renourishment projects for turtles.
Turtles, birds, gopher tortoises, snakes.
Yep. Yeah, all of the endangered and threatened species. All right. Let's see the results from our poll here. We have the biggest future threat to resilient shoreline management. And it looks like sea level rise, also the potential change in frequency and intensity of storms. Now, we do want to caveat that potential change in frequency with current core guidance states that the science isn't quite at a consensus yet where we can include that in our modeling. So, but if that's a concern, then that's a real concern. Does anyone have any comments about sea level rise? I know it's been talked about quite a bit. Roxanne and Doug, I'm just going to put your hands down.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
Jenna, there's also
Yep.
a write-in in the chat for shoreline management funding.
Yes, yes. So that would be for funding, future funding is the concern. All right,
And it
thanks,
looks like
Tyler.
David has his hand up.
Yep.
Yes, did you call on me?
Hi, David, go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I'm the county manager and county attorney of Tyrrell County, North Carolina, which of course is an Inner Banks county, but still being bordered by the Alligator River and the Albemarle Sound as part of this study. Is the issue of ghost forests going to enter into this at all? That is becoming a real issue in some of your Inner Banks counties. And it's clearly a function of saltwater intrusion.
Did you say ghost forest?
Yes, where you have saltwater intrusion into areas that were formerly Pocosin woodlands and killing trees, which the North Carolina Environmental Quality Department has some pretty good data, and it may be something you want to throw into the mix.
Okay, yeah, we can look into that. Is that a result of erosion and sediment management, or do you think that's more sea level rise?
I think both.
Okay. Yeah, we'll look into that for sure. Alrighty, I'm going to all right, so we'll move on to shoreline management policies. And this is where we want to hear about which policies are working, which policies could be modified or changed, or what conflicts, and then what's limiting suitable management, sustainable management, and what are some of the trade-offs that are having to be made. We also wanted to touch on regional beach and inlet management plans. So we'll have raise your hand if you'd like to add to that discussion. Does anybody involved in a regional management plan?
Yes.
And who is that? Sorry.
I'm sorry, this is Roxanne. I mean, we have a statewide management plan. We have inlet management plans. We have projects that, coordinate between both inlet dredging and beach placement. We have the whole panoply.
And this is just in Florida.
Correct.
Is there regional management plans for North Carolina, or South Carolina, or Georgia?
Good morning. This is Ken Richardson with North Carolina. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep. We're actually looking at encouraging communities to establish their own beach and inlet management plans, and kind of the push to do that, maybe potentially providing some regulatory relief. And so if we've got folks who would come to the Coastal Resources Commission and get their plans approved, then perhaps they could get some benefit and regulatory relief. But then they would also have to come back to the commission like once every 5 years to kind of get a reauthorization to continue on in the future. So if they stop maintaining their beaches, then the benefits kind of go away. But as long as they're continuing to manage and maintain their beaches, then there's a little bit of regulatory relief kind of built in there. So that's something that we're encouraging, and we're kind of looking at actually amending some rules now to kind of go in that direction.
Okay, great. Do you have any sources on that information? Like,
that's kind of a work in progress. So right now, we've got it's very complicated rules, and that's one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to clean things up a little bit. Since 1980, we've had kind of rules amended over the course of time, and then here we are today with very confusing rules, and so we're trying to look at clarifying that a little bit. But right now we've got about 80% of the communities on our oceanfront have done some sort of beach nourishment, whether it's large scale, small scale, and some of them have done their entire beachfront jurisdiction. Others have done portions, but 80%, and that number's growing even more. So eventually, we're looking at just about every community on the oceanfront is doing some sort of beach nourishment, and so as long as they're doing that well into the future, they've asked the commission to consider some regulatory relief where there's potentially opportunity to do that.
That sounds great. Is that also include an inlet management?
Yeah, and again, that's a work in progress kind of thing too. And we don't have any inlet management plans specifically. And we've kind of looked at how do we tackle those and trying to discourage on the ocean front. We don't allow hard structures, and sandbags is kind of that. Sandbags and beach nourishment are the erosion control things that folks can do on the ocean front. But at the inlets, the state has allowed up to 6 terminal grow-ins, and obviously there's some trade-off that comes with those, and
Sure.
and a commitment to maintain the beach there as well. And so it's kind of a balance of how do you manage the inlet without encouraging something that might cause negative impacts on neighboring or adjacent beaches. And so that's we're starting down that path with inlets. And we've kind of been doing that on the ocean front a little bit. But as far as resources online, that again, because we're very new into this, we don't have anything on our end of things. But if you look at some of the communities on the ocean front and look at their the websites for each town, they may have something where they have a beach plan, because just about everybody now is at least monitoring their beach on an annual basis. And there's a lot of good data out there for North Carolina.
Yes.
A lot of folks are being proactive in trying to maintain their beach.
Okay, great. We have a hand raised from Abyssal.
Leighton Bedsole, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm from New Hanover County, and following on Ken's comments, New Hanover County has a programmatic approach to 3 public beaches and 3 inlets, 2 of which are navigation and 2 of which are managed, or 1 of which is managed for healthy inlet shoulders. And the county's been managing these entities kind of holistically, in our opinion, for the past several decades. And so, yes, there are programs and approaches in place that vary, but at the same time come out with the same solution in our opinion. And then one other comment I want to make while I'm on a hot streak here, talking about policies. We're running into, in New Hanover County, we're very fortunate to have 2 inlet borrow sources. They're self-recharging. It's the same footprint that we've borrowed from over 50 years. And we're getting in my opinion, a conflict of interest of policy versus science when you look at the policy of COBRA and the science of NEPA, and entities are pushing for COBRA restrictions, the non-use of sand in a COBRA zone placed out of a COBRA zone. Well, at the same time, in these 2 instances in New Hanover County, that material being placed out of a COBRA zone is entered into a natural process that brings it right back to the COBRA zone. And when you're looking at these 2 inlet features and their management, they meet the criteria of the COBRA standards in terms of reducing federal expenditures, not encouraging development in coastal sensitive areas, and reducing impacts on environmental resources. And I hate to see policy push NEPA, good reproducible NEPA science, out the window. And with that, I'll hush. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, good points. Is there anybody, is South Carolina or Georgia have an active, or in the process of developing some regional type of beach and inlet management? I don't know exactly who's.
Jenna, there is a question in the chat asking, what does organizational capacity mean?
It's looking at either the government or the local government, their capacity to effectively manage the beach. So it might be, if we have a larger area, if we regionalize this, then you can have 1 or 2 people that is in charge of that, versus one for every town. Being more efficient and who's managing it, and basically having the amount, enough people within each town or county to manage the beach. Okay, thanks, Nicole. I see your comment about all South Carolina communities that receive state funding are required to submit detailed local comprehensive beach management plans. All righty, thank you. Is there anybody else want to add anything to this topic? All right, we'll go on to our next live poll that is going to be on what's needed the most in terms of oceanfront shoreline management besides funding. Funding is always the number one thing, but we'll go beyond funding. Is it public education? Is it research, more data, more tools? Is it a greater awareness of the significance of how proper management of the open coast shoreline plays into the overall resilience of a coastal system that includes the Back Bay areas? Does proper management of the sandy beaches and how that affects everybody further inland? Organizational capacity, this is the regional government collaboration. Flexibility in the approach to obtaining private property easements that are currently impeding project implementation. And if there's anything else, please write it in the chat box. All right, Tyler, I'll let you take the screen back. All right, looks like we got a lot of answers coming in. Well, we're giving everyone a few minutes to put in their answers. Does anyone have a comment on this? So it looks like most people are saying the greater awareness of how proper open coastline management plays into the overall resilience. But we also have a good variety. We have flexibility in the approach to obtaining private property easements, as well as the regional government collaboration. But more research and public education is also needed.
Hey, Jenna, this is Matt Schrader
Hey,
again
Matt.
from the Corps. If I can just, I just wanted to comment. You can see the 42% down there for that one in red. And I wanted to see if anybody could provide a little bit more context on to their perception of how this can be done, because again, kind of coming out of the South Atlantic Coastal Study and multiple other efforts, we see Back Bay just means anything behind the barrier island, whether it's estuarine, riverine, et cetera, but tidally influenced, how that risk is absolutely increasing with sea level rise, particularly from storm surge inundation. And the footprint of storm surge inundation is generally much greater, much more widespread than erosion. And I'm a coastal engineer, and erosion is what I've dealt with in accretion for the past 16 years, and kind of now my eyes are opening to these Back Bay risks. And so the concept of this question is that particularly folks who are dealing with the beaches, in my mind, want to emphasize the value of healthy beach systems not just for the environmental social benefits, which is absolutely, you know, true, but for resilience of the back bay, right? To make these oceanfront first line of defense, you know, the beaches and barrier islands is something we've heard a lot. Texas is talking about a coastal spine for their beach and dune system that's protecting Galveston Bay, et cetera. So kind of bringing that to the forefront of discussions, particularly up at a state or national level, so that the beaches remain relevant, I think is an important concept that's kind of emerging. I was curious if anybody had any comments on that, or why you might have voted for this particular concept. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Matt.
That's a great point. ASBPA did a survey of coastal management challenges nationwide, and it was basically beach managers taking the survey, and chronic beach erosion came out as number 4 on the top management challenges. Ahead of it were basically water-related challenges, like Matt mentioned, you know, long-term flooding, episodic flooding, and it did ecosystem deterioration. So I agree that while we have a better understanding of how to manage our beaches than we have of how to manage these other parts of the coastal system, it still needs to remain a top priority.
Yes, thank you, Nicole. And that was a study from the ASBPA, you said?
I'll put it in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Jenna, we also do have a write-in stating that funding is the most important factor.
Yes. Yep. Thanks, Tyler. Yeah, it definitely is.
Jenna, again, Matt, last thought that other people might want to expand on, who are more knowledgeable than me, tying into that comment, as well as Nicole's, as we look at, from the core perspective, as we look at Back Bay feasibility studies that are ongoing now, particularly in the North Atlantic, also in Florida. Some others are likely coming up in other places in this study area. The Back Bay risk is so widespread, the price tag on providing resilience to Back Bay systems can be pretty high. Again, just talking about from the national level. So to me, this idea of funding is even more important for the beaches to emphasize how they provide, you know, added resilience to Back Bay system, et cetera. If they do, you know, drawing that out of, you know, evidence-based. But it is really important to stay relevant as risk increases. You know, the funding, a limited pot, kind of decreases. So being relevant is important from that perspective as well. I don't know if Nicole or others had any comments on that beyond what they stated. Thanks.
Yeah, we do have one comment in the chat from Alan about the Back River issues. The city of Tybee is doing an assessment on the tidal salt marsh flood mitigation, and they have much more flooding and damage from the Back River flooding than beachfront flooding in previous hurricanes. Yeah, Alan, I think that's seen in a lot of areas, and it needs to start being a holistic approach. Did you want to add any more to that?
Yeah, the issue, I'm sure that everyone shares this issue. The beach is public property. The city has a lot more latitude to do things, and it's a surge issue from the ocean. The Back River is completely private property, already has docks and bulwarks and structures in place, some armoring, and it's not surge, it's just rising water. It's just the marsh. So it's a completely different set of issues and how we address it much more problematic. The homes here on Tybee on the beach, almost all of them are already lifted a foot over freeboard. The homes on the back river are the more traditional 1920s, 1930s at-grade cottages. So that's one of the reasons we have some more damage.
Yep. Yeah, Back Bay flooding is definitely been an increasing issue too.
So this is Matt. I love that comment because it's so true. And again, just from Florida experience, but yeah, we've thought about the oceanfront side. Homes have been protected, beaches have been built, natural systems or nature-based systems have been built, beaches and dunes. And on the backside, and I live on the backside of a barrier island, right? Homes, roads back here were basically built, just above mean high water 50 to 100 years ago. So of course the sea level has risen. Now back bays are much more at risk. The point brought up particularly about private property going right to the water. And I know that it differs from state to state as far as where that boundary of what's under the state jurisdiction, what's under private jurisdiction. All that I would offer is that it's really interesting when you look at the history of beach nourishment and you look at what existed before our projects. Again, just talking about Florida, but you had private property oftentimes right down to the water's edge. And so what we built, the Corps, the state, and its partners, was essentially built on what was private property. And it was built over submerged habitat on an oceanfront side or some type of, it was submerged. Now it is an emergent beach and dune system. And so things have definitely gotten more complicated, but I think it is really interesting to look back at history and compare what was done on oceanfront sides and see if some of those lessons learned can be applied on backsides of how we dealt with property issues, how we dealt with habitat, and do better. Lessons learned, but I think there's a lot of lessons learned from the front side of the islands with nature-based systems in particular that can be applied to the back. Because what we see going on the backside is absolutely what we saw in the 50s and 60s on the oceanfront side, vertical hard structures, oftentimes causing more damage than help to adjacent properties. We eventually emerged to more nature-based systems, beaches and dunes. Can we apply those same types of lessons on the back bay side? But I really appreciate that comment.
Matt, it's Alan again. Really, that's fabulous because what that suggests to me in the context of the city of Tybee's experience is that we won't be able to act until that property's already lost. We didn't start our beach nourishments until 1975. We went through a process of basically taking over everybody's property that was already underwater. Because we built the seawall in the 30s. So while the property lines extended, it was gone property. So nobody, that was a legal process. Nobody fought us. To try to do something before the property is underwater is a difficult task. Our considerations are, it becomes a matter of some form of quote retreat. A retreat, if only in the sense that you can't protect to the property lines. In fact, you probably can't protect all the individual residents, but you can protect your city's infrastructure, which allows the city to absorb a hit and recover quickly from a hit. And we have a lot of discussion now about what the obligation responsibilities of the city is to its residents. And it is not to protect all the residents. You just can't do it. But it is, I believe, to be able to absorb a hit and recover quickly, which means you're protecting your city infrastructure, which might mean we move our pumps, we move things to higher ground, and we reinforce and do some green infrastructure things that by definition will leave some of the residents literally in the marsh because that's where they built. We also believe that inevitably the legal course cannot be avoided. I mean, if someone's going to sue somebody for something, and you have to let that happen because these issues will not be resolved outside of courts. So, the thought that we want to avoid court needs to change. The law is just another tool. It's just another thing you use. And I know it's going to be difficult, and these are hard choices to make, but I believe these hard choices and these issues and the retreat that we talk about is actually going to happen more on the backside of these barrier islands than the beach side.
It's a great line there about retreat happening more on the backside. I did want to ask people that had voted for research, what kind of research and data and tools do you think are needed?
Well, it's Alan again. Since we have 2 grants to do research and data. In our case, it's assessing. It's taking an inventory. It's taking stock of what currently is there because we really don't know. So in the context of assessing the back river, it's working with, in this case, University of Georgia, to do a topographical study, hydro studies, bathymetric studies, just everything we can throw at this so that when we present to city council, it's an extremely well-informed array of options. And hopefully we can start to build some political will to try to do some things. In the case of a FEMA grant, we are doing a stormwater management plan because we do not have a up-to-date inventory of our stormwater. It's as I'm sure many cases, there's never a plan. It's all episodic and ad hoc. It's problems. And then you step back and you go, what have we done? What do we've got? So in our context, when we go to look for grants or we ask the Corps, the Corps is doing a shipwake study for us. It's just give us the data because we don't actually know what's going on. So assessment and data to take inventory of current situation and baselines.
Okay. Great explanation. Great.
This is Kathleen. I'd like to add to that. I think that since it's such a dynamic system and it's ever changing, the numbers are changing, the science is changing. It needs to be a continual updating, as stated prior. So it's not like one time we do it and that's it. We have to stay on top of it because it's not going to be the same. It's just too much of a dynamic system.
Yep. Constantly updating the bathymetry, the water levels, the return periods.
And having those numbers available on an ongoing basis, periodically, not something done every week or anything, will help make a more informed, educated assessment of how to proceed. So that's kind of why I voted for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and it ties into our comment here in the chat too about a broader approach for quantifying the benefits of private and public infrastructure for BCRs. Having all that data up to date and is needed for that as well. All right, thank you. Why don't we go on to the next? And it will be another live poll, and we'd like to see priority recommendations, what you would like to see as a priority recommendation in the assessment. We're going to have everybody rank the responses. So rates of erosion, more instrumentation, addressing and planning for sea level change, the social and economic impacts, environmental impacts, and sediment management. Tyler, why don't you take it back? I do believe it's a different code down here. So when you go to the Venti site, it'll ask for, you have to back out and put the code back in. So it's a different code, 66244534.
Hey, Jenna, we also have a comment in the chat.
Yes.
I don't know if you wanted to
Yes,
discuss that before.
Yep. The comment says, before we can have greater awareness of Back Bay issues, we need more data and research. And that's definitely true. Fred, did you want to elaborate on that some? Or if
Sure.
anybody had another comment? Yep.
There were two parts to this poll. One was public education, the other one was greater awareness. But what I'm finding is that, at least at the South Florida Water Management District, we need to develop the computer models needed for a more holistic understanding. And those models don't really exist. And so I'm just wondering how are you going to make a case for shoreline protection if you can't show the people the interconnectedness of the Back Bay, the flooding that's associated with water management and beach management at the same time. And I just want to say that I was asked by our resilience officer at the South Florida Water Management District, Carolina Moran. She wasn't able to participate. And she asked me to, and I'm a scientist at the Water Management District working on the issue of erosion and accretion. Actually, I've been doing it for 30 years now.
Great.
And so the idea of the Back Bay and the interconnectedness is really high on the scientific front, as well as the policy and management front. And what I'm seeing, it's this need for the models, the data, and the research. Even though I didn't say that initially when I did that on the poll, when I first signed the poll, the thing that struck me, like I think a lot of other people, was the need for the awareness. But then when people were talking about the data, it made me realize that I'd like to go back and change my answer to that poll.
Okay. No, you're right. It's the data informs the model that informs policy. The policy is always, looking to get updated, and the data is also used for funding and grants programs as well. So.
And it's for solutions. You can't solve a problem if you don't have the data that describes the problem.
Yep. No, that's great. Matt, did you want to add any thoughts on that?
I don't think specifically. I absolutely agree that, yeah, more data is needed to understand the interconnectedness, et cetera. Definitely agree with more instrumentation, particularly on the offshore coastline. I would say though that there is definitely awareness at this time of back bay risk. I think that there is sufficient data to show that. So Fred, let me know if I'm misunderstanding, but I think that that information exists, exactly how to address it and what the next steps are. Absolutely agree that more information is necessary to get there.
Well, yeah, I know that there are places along the southeast coast where that's definitely true. And I know at the Water Management District we have the models that describe how we have to adjust our coastal water control structures to deal with back bay flooding associated with sea level rise. But I'm involved in Everglades restoration, and what is not known is the ability as the response of the environment to the sea level rise at the same time that you're trying to preserve the environment. So in other words, there's only now an understanding of marsh enhancement. We're only beginning to understand how you can use marsh enhancement as stormwater protection and as restoration at the same time. There are no models that predict back bay accretion rates.
Gotcha. Understood. Understood and agree. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Fred. I think there's a lot of great information right now. We'll do the next poll here, Tyler. Do you want to launch it, please? All right, looks like a lot of people have logged in. And definitely number one is the rates of erosion. Yeah, I found that just, in the beginning research for this study, it's been not a consistent publication. And then also definitely we'll need to address and plan for sea level change. And plan for it, now, not future sea level rise, but also now. Angela, did you have any thoughts when you see these rankings? Are they?
No, I think they're consistent with what people have been saying. I mean, I see data in there twice, obviously ranked first and fourth. And I think that is some of the key is to get the public awareness out there we've discussed, and the greater awareness is understanding, the data, not only on future projections of erosion, but also, what we're seeing in tide gauges and offshore wave buoys as far as looking at storms and future storm surge. I think it's good to get the instrumentation out there. We know along the U.S. Atlantic coast, there aren't a lot of tidal gauges out there, and there's a limited amount of offshore wave buoys. So I think from the research perspective, I see more data as helping us to better inform the public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe, along with that would be more of the modeling that Fred was speaking to. All right, thank you. Let's see, our next discussion point will be on the shoreline management strategies that you would like to see emphasized. throughout the report, and the last section particularly will be our recommendations that will go in front of Congress. So in the poll, select up to 3 things that you would like to see as the top strategies. Can go to the Menti poll again and put in this code, the 66244534. And a few things to note when we talk about structures and armoring, it's understood that it's a smart use of it, not one property at a time that creates end erosion. And, managed retreat is not just buying out the entire block, it's doing it with all parties involved. All right, looks like beach nourishment is definitely on top. Does anyone want to comment on any of the other strategies? Where would there be a good example of natural nature-based features? Somewhere that we could identify as a case study or highlight in the report. Does anyone have any locations near them that they'd like to see highlighted?
Hey, this is Fred again. In Biscayne Bay, I believe that Miami-Dade has spent a fair amount of time building up their mangrove system, and that is done with moving fresh water, changing, diverting fresh water, and trying to keep hypersalinity down, and that's not a beach environment, but it is a shoreline, and so there's documentation of the success of that from Durham, the Department of Environmental Management in Miami-Dade.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be a great study to look at. Does anyone have any of? Oh, sorry, go on.
I also thought that up in Jacksonville that there is this technique of thin film sediment deposition onto the marshes in the St. Lucie River.
Mm-hmm.
That might be also an example of natural features.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it goes in with our comment here about beneficial reuse of dredge material for thin layer placement. Has anybody tried that with their county or state? And if you have, if you've run into policy issues or rules that have had to be changed or are in the way of that?
Hey, this is Clay McCoy with the Corps of Engineers, and we did it up in Georgia, and we didn't have any policy issues.
Okay, I didn't know if there was any coastal zone regulations.
Yeah, we did consult with Georgia DNR on the project.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Clay, do you remember where in Georgia that was done?
Jekyll Island.
Jekyll Island, all right.
Jenna, I have a question for the group. This is Matt Schrader. If no one has any other comments on this, but I'm curious, and it would be something that would that this study could potentially draw out. But what is the difference between beach nourishment, which you can see gets the most, and natural and nature-based features, which is a little bit less? But to me, beach and dune nourishment is absolutely a nature-based feature, but it's not often perceived in that way. And I'm curious if anybody would like to elaborate if they do see them as two different things, or if they are the same, or if anybody had any comments on that. Or maybe to the National Shoreline Management Study team, why would these be separated in the questionnaire?
I think for this, it was beach nourishment, beach and dune nourishment as a program versus items like living shorelines or thin layer placement. But you're right, beach nourishment is a natural and nature-based approach.
Hey, Roxanne, I don't know if you're still on, but do you have any thoughts on that? The perception of beach nourishment, if it is or if it isn't nature-based, why it's called out differently? Just kind of like if you had any thoughts from a state perspective.
I think you're muted, Roxanne.
She might have dropped off.
Okay.
Okay, just curious. Thanks.
Yeah, no, good point, Matt. I see we have a bunch of votes here for managed retreat. Is that something that anybody wants to share their own personal, if you had to do that in your area, or? I know Folly Beach has had to experience that.
We've seen some limited amount of it in Florida. But I just think, the cost of these Back Bay projects is just so huge. I just don't see us being able to do multiples of them.
Yep. And when you mean back-based projects, you're talking the surge barriers?
Floodgates, surge barriers, as well as flood proofing. And, the Miami Back Bay is kind of like, let's just do everything. And there will be huge institutional problems to it. So only increasing the cost.
Yep. They are big projects. Alrighty. So last call for any local stories on these where you've done managed retreat or setbacks? Has anybody used the buyout programs through FEMA?
There are FEMA buyouts all around the Southeast.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty, they're pretty small scale. I mean, I think I just read about one that had like 30 properties.
And are they all grouped together, or are they been spread apart?
Well, usually you got, a local government with a flood mitigation plan or something that FEMA approves. So they're not spread out. They're in a neighborhood of some sort.
Alrighty. Let's go back here to our last discussion point, or second to last. So if you were picking up the newspaper and you saw headlines about this report, we're just looking for, what do you think those headlines would say about the recommendations from the report? So you can go to the mentee.com and then use code 2557-6333. And Tyler, I'll pass it back to you now. And this is you just write in what you think the headline should say. Matt, did you have any other questions for the group while we're...
Nope, not right now. Be interesting to see, yeah, what some folks. So as folks type this, it's going to kind of look like a one-liner, million cubic yards of sand found offshore of Georgia or something like that. Is that what you're looking for on this one?
Yeah. Yep. What the headline in the newspaper might be.
Cool.
Or Georgia and Florida combine to create, you know, regional management plan for. Yep, definitely cooperation. And it's not all gloom and doom. I think we're going to have some great recommendations, and this is going to get, it continues the conversation. Matt, did you want to share maybe your thoughts on the recommendations?
Well, I would definitely like to see more emphasis on that the beaches are an integral part of a coastal system. I think that that's really essential, again, at the national level. Beaches will always be relevant, right? But really drawing that out, Roxanne hit on how much some of these, the Back Bay projects have the potential to cost. There's only so much pie. So, you know, beaches have to remain relevant. And I think what beaches have done since, you know, since the 50s, 60s, et cetera, whenever beach nourishment was begun, and we've gotten better, but what they've done is basically, you know, allowed these systems to stay, systems that would have turned into just a hardened shoreline. We have some amazing locations that people don't even recognize are actually ongoing construction projects. And I think that that's a great thing, that what we've actually designed most of these beaches to do, they're only doing 5% of the time, and that's what we justify them on. This gets back to some of the original conversation that Doug brought up. You know, we have to get better at our methods of quantifying the social and environmental benefits of these projects as well, because they really do benefit entire regions, and we don't even quantify that. So I hope that that's going to kind of be some of the output that goes up to Congress as a result of this report. We're making good steps in those directions, but it'll be great to hear everybody's perspectives to kind of further them. Thanks.
Perfect summary. Thank you, Matt. Does anyone have any other recommendations or headlines or? Any they want to add? And we'll summarize some of these for our our meeting minutes. All right, let's go to our last discussion here, and this will piggyback off of what Matt was just saying about how the report can be useful to your priorities and needs in your, continued efforts to manage beaches and sandy shorelines. I don't know if we've heard from anybody from South Carolina. Or North Carolina. Want to add in? Okay. I guess the last question is, again, if there's potential areas that can be used as case studies, please send them to our email. It's nsms.southatlantic@cdmsmith.com. And that'll be the email for all. If you have any questions, correspondence, want to keep in touch, please use that email.
Jenna, any specificity on the types of case studies you're looking for?
No, I think we want a range. I think we want areas that have been changing naturally on their own. We want areas where where policy has been implemented or management practice has been implemented and it worked really well, or something that was done back in the 40s and 50s that now needs to be updated. I think we want a range of all types. And they'll just be like 2 or 3 paragraph call outs in the report.
Hi there. I don't know if you can hear me. My name's Heidi Wolf.
Hi, Heidi. We can hear you.
Great. I'm calling in from my phone, and I have a toddler here who's working with some kinetic sand, which is, very close to shoreline erosion. Just kidding. But I work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I am in the headquarters infrastructure management division, and I'm tasked with the small thing of making all of our infrastructure more resilient and looking at ways to study the efficacy of nature-based solutions and how we can get our engineers in the service more comfortable with them, and then expanding that out to other federal agencies and other groups. And so I have a few areas that I'm looking at to do pilot studies in coordination with different folks. I'm looking at working with the Silver Jackets and DOD and things like that. So I have North Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia on my radar for a few pilot project areas, and they're all different but similar. So I'll definitely be emailing you all with my hopes and dreams, and maybe we can collaborate on this.
Yeah. Oh, that would be wonderful.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Lisa, did you want to add any last remarks?
No, I just, again, wanted to say thanks to everybody. I feel like we got a lot of information today for to move forward, and it was great. So thanks all very much for participating. And thanks, Jenna.
Thank you. So I just want to go over our last few steps here. June 30th will be the 50% draft. And in early July, that'll be sent out to everybody to take a look at. I think we'll be asking for certain gaps that we've found, for certain feedback. By late July, we'll be scheduling our second stakeholder meeting where we'll review the comments that were received and how they will be addressed. And then come October would be our chance to review the 80% draft and look at preliminary recommendations then again. We have our contacts down here at the bottom if anybody needs them. And I think that wraps it up. I wanted to thank everybody for participating and calling in. And go ahead, Matt.
Hey, I have a quick question.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
This is Doug Piekowski with Foam. So June 30th is a 50% draft. So between now and then, somebody will be working on a draft document with feedback from this one call.
With feedback from this call and other sources, like we've been using a lot of the SACS feedback.
Okay. So if I'm being honest, that this was an hour and a half. It was good discussion. I'm not actually clear on my end still, kind of whether we've articulated a clear problem statement, clear objectives of what you'll be addressing, and specifically what kind of those tangible products may be that are coming out of this. I know we talked about recommendations and things like that. We went through a bunch of surveys on this call, asking people questions and what they prioritize. But, I would just recommend that, obviously a lot of the folks that are on this call probably participated in SACS, and there is overlap, even though we're trying to, separate the two. I think it's a great opportunity that you have here with this national assessment. Great opportunity to leverage what came from SACS. I think there's a need to better communicate what the objectives are and what potential recommendations could be. So I think maybe a small group of some of the core folks could be really helpful in maybe articulating some examples and what the end state could be, so that this stakeholder group between now and when you have a 50% document may better be able to understand what they could offer that could really make this a better document. So I just want to share that as feedback. It wasn't clear to me, and maybe I'm the only one or maybe not, but I think there might have been a missed opportunity to get some more feedback leading up to this draft.
All right. No, thank you, Doug. We can set up smaller groups, or if you want to, we can talk one-on-one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Doug, and I appreciate your comments here. I do think that one of the key aspects of bringing this group into some of those review processes, like the 50% and the 80%, are to make sure that we're crafting the message appropriately and capturing those recommendations. And so I think that's a good point and good recommendation that you have, as far as maybe having some interim meetings and discussions to make sure that when we get to even that 50% draft, that we're not missing any opportunities. So
Yeah,
I think that's something that our group should go back.
I think you could probably have like a team of 3 or 4 people that, have the experience of SACS and already in their mind kind of have examples of what could come out of this process and what those recommendations could look like. And I think, sharing those examples now will help people provide more constructive feedback in these additional opportunities to review.
Okay. Yeah, did you have any thoughts on who?
We can talk offline.
Okay. That sounds good. All right. Mariah, did you have any other closing?
No, just I again appreciate, Doug, your comment, and I think the team will get back together and look at how we can make sure that we're not missing any opportunities to capture key recommendations that we want to incorporate in this report and our national report. And then I just want to thank everyone for your time today. Our goal is obviously to make sure that we get the most robust report going forward, so that we are not missing any chance to push forward some of these key issues to Congress and make sure that we're taking the appropriate next steps. So thank you all. And Matt,
Right.
do you have any comments as well or closing remarks?
That was for Matt.
I don't. Yep, I don't. Thank you. And yeah, looking forward to additional discussion. Like Doug's saying, I think that there's definitely a lot to be pulled from the sack. So encouraged that we look into that more. Thanks.
All right, everyone. Thank you again. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.